Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. Craig is back. He's been on many times before. If you haven't seen his past episodes, they're always a pleasure. We talk about Fred Hampton, RFK. We talk about JFK. We talk about a lot of subjects that happen to deal with the dark side of history, the real side of history. And hopefully, we can get some good memories out there for some people to at least get a better accurate depiction on half this stuff. But Craig, do you mind introducing yourself to everyone out there listening from might be new that haven't heard you the first time?
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be back. Thank you very much, Robbie. My name is Craig Ciccone. I'm an independent historian and consultant from Highland Park, Michigan. I've been studying political assassinations since the mid 1980s. The most of my last 30 years has been culminating in trying to write a book on the life and death of Fred Hampton, who was the deputy chairman of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party. But for a lot of researchers, they, for a lack of a better term, cut their teeth on the big three, what we call the big three: JFK, MLK, and RFK. So my only contribution to the JFK case is a database of eyewitnesses in Dealey Plaza, which I turned into a book and a map of Dealey Plaza.
Yes, and it's actually a very well detailed map as well too. You sent it to me. I have it. It's going to be framed up on my wall, and you're also making one for the RFKs as well too. Did I tell you I got a hold of Rosie Greer?
No,
Yeah, I sent him an email.
really.
He responded back after like 2 weeks and told me he was sorry, but he was of an age where he needs like major assistance. And I was like, man, if it takes 6 hours for you to do the thing, I'll edit it down like I did with Blakey, and we could just have a conversation. History needs to be recorded in this sense. I never heard back, but it was just cool. He sent me a really heartfelt paragraph and everything. It was
That was
cool.
very nice. In fact, one of your frequent guests as well, uh, Michigander, fellow Michigander, Tim Smith. Um, he reached out to Scott Enyart, and apparently they had a very long conversation. So I'm anxious to hear what Tim was able to glean from him and the progress of Scott's case.
I wanted to have you on to discuss a lot of things relating to the JFK assassination, some things about with Cyril Weck's testimony, some things that we've probably heard in the community that have been out there for a very long time, and just kind of get a good basis. And obviously, I respect your opinion and thoughts, and you have a lot of information in your head about certain things about the JFK assassination, especially when it comes to the Zapruder film. I think your statement was that we base a lot of our kind of sense or speculation and justification on a silent film. Everyone uses the Zapruder film to kind of depict when the shots are hitting, and it was the problem that was brought up with the HSCA when they were watching the film, and they also try to use the audio that they had to hook it up to it and see if it matched. I wanted to get your first kind of thoughts on what you've heard in the JFK community that have been kind of things out there that are myths, but nobody knows where they really come from. Again, the fight at Parkland was one. I think a lot of people think like that JFK was killed because of the Vietnam War. Again, I'm not totally against that one. I just think that's a long walk for a short drink of water. I think there's a lot of reasons people wanted Kennedy dead, sadly. And I think that, it wasn't, I'm not an LBJ guy, but looking through a lot of information and recording stuff, I'm starting to get a better depiction about what the times were like, what was going on, and just how things had kind of elevated from there. So I wanted to get your opinion or just thought on anything you've heard in the JFK community that has been something you've had to go back and relearn. And constantly, we're always relearning things or learning more stuff about a certain thing. So I wanted to, does any of them come to your mind, one thing?
Well, that's a lot to unpack, certainly. And I appreciate the fact that you said that we need to know the context. We need to remember the context of when this event happened. It did not happen in a vacuum. It was not an isolated incident, especially when you look at the context of the 1960s. But it's important, and this is the point that Oliver Stone brought out with his movie JFK. The who and the how are, these are parlor games to keep us distracted from the most important question, which is why? Why was he killed? So this feeds into a lot of it. And using the crux as the Zapruder film, why is the Zapruder film so important? Well, mainly because it's the only color film that we have. It is, as far as we know, in existence, the only full film, amateur, but full film of the entire assassination from start to finish. And it was in the best vantage point that we know of. So we go back to the Zapruder film as a very important record of what happened. The problem is that we put so much emphasis on it. You're talking about the JFK community. And it's still to this day, 60 some years later, still divided, and there's no consensus over its authenticity, whether or not the spliced frames were in fact evidence of missing frames, not even considering the spliced frames, but the fact that there could be missing frames. We automatically uh, questioned the authenticity of the Zapruder film because of how it was dealt with. From the time that it left Zapruder's hands and out of his camera to the Secret Service to the FBI, the fact that it was 12 years before the public ever saw the Zapruder film. They saw stills of it, very selective stills of it, because Time Life magazine bought it from Abraham Zapruder.
James Wagenvord is the guy who printed the frames out of order, out of sequence, and made it look like the head actually lunged forward instead of lunging back. The only retraction that Life magazine had to do.
Exactly. So this also underscores part of the problem with all of the evidence from the JFK case, and unfortunately, it happened again in '68 with the RFK case, is that they had one opportunity to do it right, to do things right, and time after time after time, with evidence after evidence after evidence, they didn't, for whatever reason. You want to call it malfeasance, you want to call it incompetence, you want to call it we weren't expecting the president to be killed, so we simply were not prepared to do this, which speaks, of course, to the just the base professionalism or lack thereof of a sheriff's department, a police department, medical examiner's office, right down the line. So you're all claiming incompetence, but anyway, like I said, we could get way off on topic, and your introduction is a lot to unpack. So, is there anything from the JFK community that any rumors or anything that's still
Yeah, like the JFK film highlighted certain prevalent things I think that we all look at, like the military industrial complex, CIA angle. A lot of things like the men who killed Kennedy kind of focus more on like LBJ, or they focus on like a mob connection type thing. I think you have statements from even the HSCA where they go all over the board, but the main things, these become solidified in history. And like we're dealing with stuff now with like even with the Secret Service agent driver turned around and shot JFK
yeah,
in the head.
yes, or the Secret Service agent behind them who had I
Hickey.
think, yeah, I think it was an AR-14, something like that, or at least this 1963's version of it, an automatic weapon. That when it lunged forward, he fell and accidentally shot Kennedy in the back of the head. So it's things like that, and it lends itself because there's such lack of authenticity and lack of authority in the initial investigation and even in the second investigation, official investigation, that lends itself to these kinds of theories. Because I feel that a lot of people in the JFK assassination community, instead of trying to reach a consensus on many of these points and going back over them and over them and over them and agreeing on something, we instead, in order to elevate our own egos, our own profile, we have to come up with new things to write about. Because when you take a subject and you write 2,500 books on it, something's got to be new, right? Something that will be, appeal to the public's, I don't know, real curiosity, and so theories are um, seemingly brought up out of thin air, and things like that. So, or why Oswald was guilty,
Do you have in well, do you have in your mind any it's kind of speculation. Do you have any mind any conspirators that you think that have main involvement? And in my opinion, I think when you look at what the evidence is in the case, everyone that mentions it's evidence of them being behind the assassination, it's not that. It's evidence of a cover up. Everything that is evidence is cover up. That is well documented, it is well recorded. Within 48 hours, you're eliminating the possibility of a getaway driver. You're telling me you arrested 4 different people on November 22nd. And then when Oswald was arrested, you released all the other ones. Not even including the three tramps, by the way. Just four other random people. Larry Florer was one of them, kid who was arrested when he was in the Dow Tex building coming down. There's video footage of that. There's another guy, Donald Wainhouse, that looks exactly like Lee Harvey Oswald almost, arrested as well, too, brought in. We have footage of that, and him being released. Again, these are things where it seemed like every aspect of the conspiracy or where they would search for it was just cut off because they had their guy and they had to get it out of the way. So then all the evidence we talk about now would have to be about a cover up. What are they eliminating to make sure that it sticks to the official narrative again? So,
and why?
When it comes to possible conspiracies.
With the Zapruder film, however, it again, the reason why we gravitate to it, not just because of the historical relevance of it, but because it served the Warren Commission or the FBI via the Warren Commission or vice versa, a platform to seemingly determine how many shots that were fired and the reactions of both men. And when you get into that kind of subjective territory in a silent film that at the time, still to this day, is quite grainy compared to the digitalization of today's photography and filming. We ask too much of the Zapruder film. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. And we take that in conjunction with other pieces of evidence. And since a lot of my study has been on the eyewitnesses there, you're including an eyewitness of John Connally. Now, John Connally, he has been very, very consistent throughout his entire life. And that's a rarity, especially in the face of pressure that could have been brought upon him to either change his testimony or to kind of not change it, but maybe steer it or don't emphasize points that would indicate that there were more than one shooter. He was still very consistent throughout his life. And it makes it even more tragic that his wife did not have the balls, Nellie Connally did not have the balls, that when John died, to put this to bed, put this to rest for all of eternity. That is, he was buried without removing the rest of the bullet fragments that were still in his wrist. The doctors removed as much fragments as they could without leaving him under anesthetic for too long or risking possible nerve damage or, things that come along with surgery and trying to remove minuscule pieces of metal. So the day he died, he still had metal in his wrist and possibly his chest. I can't remember. But instead of allowing that to happen so that they could take those fragments and the fragments that were removed on November 22nd, 1963, weigh them, and then compare them with the weight of Commission Exhibit 399 or the magic bullet, the bullet that was recovered at Parkland Hospital and was attributed to all of the wounds, non-fatal wounds of both Kennedy and Connally, and then being able to say, hey, there's too much metal that was taken out of Connally to have come from this bullet, hence no single bullet theory, hence no Lee Harvey Oswald did it and did it alone. There was a conspiracy. And so that was a lost opportunity. Anyway, so we look at this Zapruder film, even though it's silent, even though it's not the best quality, and we put so much emphasis on it, and to the number of shots, to the reaction of the men, and I think for a lot of people it's subjective. We're about to talk about Dr. Cyril Wecht, who was the chief medical examiner for Allegheny County, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, very world-renowned forensic pathologist. In fact, was one of the first qualified forensic pathologists to view the autopsy materials in the National Archives in the early 1970s. So he was quite authoritative and quite an animated character, which is why he was so popular with other researchers and put in many documentaries and specials and things like that. So his analysis of the Zapruder film, especially when he testified before the House Select Committee on Assassinations as one of the 9 pathologists who were convened by the House Select Committee on Assassination to review the autopsy materials in both Martin Luther King's case and JFK's case. So he's one of the most recognizable and important figures in talking about the single bullet theory and the Zapruder.
Before we get into Wecht, I want to ask you about Connally. There's a lot of people that made statements later on that kind of separated from the official narrative, but at the same time still agreed with the official conclusion. People saying, I do not agree with the magic bullet, but I do agree on the Warren Commission's conclusion. Connally is one of these people. Again, it's still possible to disagree with the magic bullet theory, but then also agree with the conclusion of Oswald. The reason is that there might be a difference in the number of shots. If Connally stating that I was not hit with the same bullet as JFK, I was hit with a separate bullet, but the Warren Commission is firmly standing at 3, or the official investigation, FBI investigation, because we know they did it, not the Warren Commission, is saying 3 shots, then that means that there was a 4th shot. Now, Oswald has 3. So even if he agrees with the official conclusion, that 4th shot has to come from somewhere. Could be even more shots. I'm just saying it's more than what the line is saying.
Absolutely.
Even though they agree with where the evidence led up to, I'm stating that with Connally, we get into this position where he's refusing to agree with the magic bullet theory. He goes and tosses it out there, says, I do not agree with that, but I do agree with the official findings. Malcolm Kilduff does the same thing. But also all the members, Richard Russell, John Sherman Cooper, others that were on the board that agreed and said Connally changed our minds.
Yes.
We have to take that in an examination. Does that mean that you're looking at it yourself and going, yeah, it doesn't make sense? Or do they trust Connally's word so much that they're willing to do that over the footage or over anything that they've seen that might show them something different? Again, the footage of the Z film, I think, shows that there's a separate shot, and Connally is already turning around when JFK gets hit. And then as he's turning around again to look over his other shoulder is when we see him wince and we see the different impact. And this is what Wecht tried to fight about the measuring of the bullet speed, and that there was no way that the reactions would be that delayed on the film if they were hit by the same bullet, which again is just a good point. And he was laughed at by the HSCA and other members. So
no, absolutely. And you bring up a good point. First of all, about eyewitness testimony, and can you pick and choose from any witness? You want to agree with them, or you want to elevate some portion of their statement, but then say, "Oh, he's full of shit," because he still thinks the Warren Commission came to the correct conclusion, even if they were wrong about the single bullet theory. So it's that battle of picking and choosing what seems to be a very strong eyewitness, and like I said, picking and choosing things in his testimony that elevate your perspective of it. So that's a dangerous thing to do. And theoretically, you're absolutely correct. If we remove the magic bullet theory, it doesn't exonerate Oswald, whether or not you believe there was a 4th shot, or you could happen to say, because there was a missed shot. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the sequence of the shots, well, not the sequence of the shots, but the conclusion of the shots. One missed the motorcade, and this is the one that we can play with. It's just that the FBI and the Warren Commission didn't want to play with it too long because they didn't want to be too fanciful in their theories, which is ironic because the one that they settled on is the most fanciful one. So if you have a missed shot, you could have it do anything. Now, when I say it's missed, that's what the conclusion of the Warren Commission was. It doesn't mean that it couldn't have hit someone in the motorcade. That is, if Oswald only fired 3 shots, and he did, well, they claim Oswald did, and 3 shots from the 6th floor of the Texas School Depository, then theoretically you could have Kennedy shot through the neck with one of the bullets, Connally shot through the chest, wrist, and thigh with another one, and then Kennedy being shot through the head with a 3rd one. So if you remove the single bullet theory, it does not exonerate 3 shots, and it doesn't exonerate Lee Harvey Oswald. But you really have to make a leap for that, for lots of reasons. The government didn't make that leap, so I do not recall any researcher that says, especially those who believe that Oswald did it and did it alone, that you could have a missed shot, not have the single bullet theory, and still have him be the lone gunman. That's with the crux of the government's case. Not just that Lee Harvey Oswald fired those 3 shots and they hit their mark, and then HSCA said, well, there was a 4th shot, hence a conspiracy, but it missed. And there's no collusion between the guy who was behind the picket fence and Oswald, who was up in the Texas School Book Depository. So again, we're asked to to ignore everything else and just go with that kind of line of thinking. And I just can't take it there. But with Cyril Wecht, he was, and Connally, of course, they were very convincing in their testimony. So whether you agree with it or don't agree with it, it's still a matter of contention.
Do you believe someone talked to Connally about his statements and told him that he needed to wind it in and that he had to agree with the official conclusion? Or do you think that, like, again, not super conspiratorial here. I think if you listen to how convincing J. Edgar Hoover is in his phone call on November 29th, he's telling LBJ on the phone, and LBJ is not looking at the evidence. He's just listening to Hoover and having Hoover repeat it to him. And Hoover saying, we got the rifle. We had tests to be able to prove it. There was no tests done that were conclusive or even right in the first place. The HSCA proved that the FBI fired the pistol too many damn times that where any test firing afterwards would recognize it as unusable. So again, I have this and I just think you're talking to Connally. LBJ's like, hey man, here's Hoover. And Hoover just breaks it down to him. We got his fingerprints. We got the number of shots. What did Hoover state on the phone call with LBJ? 3 shots were fired at the president. LBJ says, were any of them fired at me? No, sir, all fired at the president, and we got him. That's what 3 shots. Right, he states it. There's nothing else. So again, is it convincing because someone who's doing the investigation is going to sit down and tell you what's going on? Or did someone pull him aside and say, hey, we can't have a conspiracy here because the country's going to fall into whatever? Many different angles again. And I want people to bring this up so they're not just assuming that Connally's like a dastardly evil person trying to cover up things. I'm sure he probably had doubts later, maybe, but he does state some weird things where, you know, if you're not agreeing with the magic bullet theory, it kind of crumbles the Warren Commission's work. And that's their biggest thing right now, is holding on to the magic bullet. As Cyril Wecht says, it's constructing this false investigation.
Well, yeah, but it is. And the Warren Commission, whether they did it themselves or they were shoehorned into doing it by the FBI or the Secret Service or any other political pressure that came to bear, they committed themselves. They committed themselves to those 3 bullets. They committed themselves to Lee Harvey Oswald. And from their own conclusions at the beginning of their report, they boxed themselves into the no conspiracy, foreign or domestic. It was Lee Harvey Oswald and Lee Harvey Oswald alone. Of course, they also had to contrive some dubious motivation on Oswald's part too. So yes, the government's conclusion is based completely on the idea that Oswald did it and did it alone with no conspiracy, foreign or domestic, which then drove the campaign and the demand to release all of the files, because if it was an open and shut case, if you have J. Edgar Hoover calling Johnson and assuring him from the get-go that this is how it happened and we got our man without the investigation even being complete, then you look at the motivation of why they did that and all the pressure that was brought to the members of the Warren Commission to uphold those conclusions that the FBI came to. And again, the FBI coming to those conclusions within weeks of the assassination, before their investigation was even complete.
Even though if you're not familiar with Connally's testimony to the HSCA, I'll play some clips on it in a bit. What would be something for you that gave you pause with Connally? He stated a lot of things. I'll just give a quick example, which was the idea of where the destination for where they were going to do the speech was going to be at. Not just the trademark, but the women's building was brought up. And apparently Connally stated that he was going for the women's building. Mm-hmm. No, the Secret Service was going for the women's building, and Connally fought for the trademark. Mm-hmm. So the Secret Service would have had way better protection aspects of the women's building because there would have been other things. Connally tried to kind of diffuse that and said the trademark would be better. But then it was brought up by Stuart McKinney of the HSCA, where he asked Connally, would you have to go through Dealey Plaza to get to the women's building? Mm-hmm. And again, it's that weird route change. Connally talked about it, that the route was published before, which he thought was strange. He didn't know why it was published in there. Apparently it was published in multiple different newspapers, but a couple of them were incorrect routes. And the Dallas Herald, I think, got the correct one and published it a few days before. And he was asked, do you think Oswald would have time to set up and do all this stuff? And he said, no, there would have been no possibility, because it really wasn't finalized until a couple of days before. Even though it was published, it wasn't finalized. That was the route they were going to take. But again, Stuart McKinney asked him, would you have to go through Dealey Plaza to go to the women's building? And he said, no, you could have just took the Stemmons Freeway. So again, there's a conspiratorial thought process that becomes in where Connally knew something was going to happen, and he had to go through Dealey Plaza to pass by the TSBD. Again, assuming the shots even came from there. Weck liked to think that from the angle that it came from the second floor. He stated that to the HSCA that there's a possibility that the shots could have come from the second floor, because then you would have actually got a correct angle that would have went through both Connally and JFK. But there's no way in hell that a bullet coming from the sixth floor is going to go all the way down into JFK, bounce upwards, and then go into somebody else when the complete line of fire should have aimed right into where the driver was sitting. So again, these are things that Weck was bringing up as just possibilities, and the HSCA was trying to tear him down and make him think this was his thoughts, when really he was just bringing up other things you should be looking at in an investigation.
Well, I'm going to return to that Wecht and the single bullet theory. But as far as Connally is concerned, what should have happened, and I don't know how often Tim would be um, a better authority on this, but what the House Select Committee on Assassination should have done is go back over, or when they're questioning somebody, have their statements from 1964 with them. I can't recall anything off the top of my head that Connally said, or he should have said, or been asked, um, except for one particular thing. In his testimony before the Warren Commission in April of '64, he said something curious, and of course they didn't follow up on it or ask him why he thought that. Um, he's already been shot, and he says, "I just looked down and I was covered with blood, and the thought immediately passed through my mind that there were 2 or 3 people involved or more in this, or somebody was shooting with an automatic rifle." That's for somebody who is a hunter like Connally, who knows guns and um, is familiar with their sound and the rapport, and um, there are some experts who can tell the kind of gun based on the sound of it being fired. You know, um, why he wasn't asked in his House Select Committee assassination testimony to clarify that. What made him think that there were 2 or 3 people involved, or that it was automatic gunfire? Because he's not the only one to say that. There were also Secret Service agents that testified that it sounded like automatic fire.
Well, why did Sawyer
So,
have to ask James Rowley why John Connally was the only one that identified it as rifle fire, and a lot of people that said there was a motorcycle backfire? None of the Secret Service agents. This became a problem for Lewis Stokes, and it also became a problem for Sawyer when it came to questioning Rowley. That John Connally was the only one that positively identified at the first shot he heard something that it was a rifle shot. Now, he did state that it was 2 shots coming from his right shoulder, over his right shoulder behind him, which would have been in the area of the Texas School Book Depository.
well,
So,
careful. No, like you just said, the Daltex building. There were 3 buildings behind them into
yeah,
the.
but we know what he was talking about. He was aiming for that location, at least somewhere in that general
Well,
direction. Even Marilyn Zitzman changed her statement later. Again, standing right behind Abraham Zapruder, holding him up while he took the film. She stated in a couple interviews to the Warren Commission that she said this, but then she said after all the information has came out after so many years that she has changed her opinion, and now she doesn't know where the hell the shots came from. They could have came from over by the fence area. You know,
well, and that's
I'll play her testimony on that just so we get that accurate.
right. But again, we're talking about eyewitness testimony, not necessarily the unreliability of it, but the problems with eyewitness testimony, especially over a certain number of years. So she reads things or hears things since that time, and it clouds what you remember or influences what you remember, as opposed to a genuine recollection that can't be shaken. So there are a lot of motivations in not just what witnesses say on their own, their own motivation, but as I point out in my book, or the database of the eyewitnesses, you have to also look at the people who questioned them, not just the answers that they gave. So it's questions that were asked and how they were asked, and then those are the questions that weren't asked. So it's just as important to examine the questioner than the questionee. And we're already talking about this as far as Connally, and could he have been persuaded just like he persuaded other people? Or I think it's possible that in some aspects he was in fact influenced by the political pressure that was being brought down. Simply, if you look at at the statement that he made to the FBI in December of '64, um, and the fact that there are things that are attributed to him by the FBI that he couldn't have possibly said. So the FBI is actually putting in a narrative and sprinkling it with things that he may have said.
With Connally's statement about a bullet hitting him and changing the minds of some other Warren Commission members, do you think that's because of Connally having experience with rifles, or the fact that it makes him a stronger witness to know when he was hit? Because of the fact that he was hit, that's not something that easily fades with memory. That's something that's going to stick in with you a long time.
No, absolutely, and I think that in conjunction with the consistency of the testimony of both him and his wife Nellie, I think all of that taken, together, because again, eyewitness testimony isn't simply just, again, something that exists in a vacuum or is one dimensional. There's context to be had here, and part of that context of his believability and his ability to convince other Warren Commission members is, I think, the consistency um, of his statements throughout the months and subsequently years, but also Nellie Connally, that they said the same thing, or were consistent in their statements, taken with his experience as a rifleman.
I think the real issue with Connally that we do need to hold him accountable for is not only the fact with the lack of protection on the Dallas Strip that he said he was not aware of at the time. He said he wasn't fearful of the climate of Dallas. He was more afraid of fence signs or postcards or things that were going to be saying "Go home, Kennedy" on it. We do need to address the fact that he did try and say that all these critics need to stop that have no experience and do not know what they are talking about. He called out Mark Lane specifically. Again, whatever your stance is on Mark Lane, the real thing is that Mark Lane was able to provide us with witnesses that were not identified or even stated in their testimony in the Warren Commission report. That was not important because it did not fit with the official narrative.
Well, I mean, Mark Lane, at least his first contribution, which was Rush to Judgment, the book, and then the documentary, like you said, it is absolutely historic what he did. He took these witnesses, he put them on camera, especially at a time when some of the witnesses were mysteriously dying. So the fact that he captured them on film, that some of whom were not very well examined by law enforcement or authorities, he got them on film, and he wrote a book that wasn't politically based. It wasn't his 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 motivation was not to show why Kennedy was killed, but simply that the Warren Commission was wrong and how it was wrong and why it was wrong. So it was the same thing with Harold Weisberg. So the ones who initially were simply criticizing were critics of the Warren Commission and their conclusions. That so the fact that Connally could say, well, he didn't know what he was talking about. Actually, he did, as far as the evidence that he was talking about and the inconsistency of the evidence, the selectivity of the evidence, the destruction of the evidence. All of these are established. But the fact that Mark Lane didn't go into the philosophies of motivations of why Kennedy was killed, or why they would have covered this up, or why they destroyed this evidence, that wasn't the impetus of his book. So that criticism just doesn't ring very strongly.
I'm gonna get ready to play a couple clips here in a second, but when we talk about Nellie Connally and her viewpoints on things, she stated in her HSCA testimony that she heard some stories later on that she like grabbed her husband and threw him to the ground or something like that in the car. She said that all she did was pull him over onto his lap, and she said there was no way. She explained the car seating, there was no way to this, but also explained one thing to me I didn't really know, and was that the reason why Roy Kellerman couldn't turn around and jump back there was because that giant bar that was in between that seat. And it kind of did bring up, I mean, he didn't react at all. That's his fault. That is a problem. But the factor that even if he did, would he been able to go over the seat, much like we know that Rufus Youngblood was able to turn around and jump over his onto LBJ.
Well, because it was a convertible.
Yes.
That didn't have those bars, and it goes like it's the same kind of argument about, well, if Kennedy had the bubble top on, it wasn't bulletproof.
It wasn't bulletproof.
So what could Greer or Kellerman do? I mean, even if they decided to jump back there, they'd have to jump over a 6'4" Texan sitting in a jump seat, cramped in a jump seat. It's the second guessing everything. And I suppose that for the Secret Service agents, especially Clint Hill, it haunted them for the rest of their lives. But Nellie Connally, yeah, I think she was pretty consistent with, she simply pulled him down. She didn't wrap her arm around his neck and pull him down. She just I, the only arm that was available to him was the left one, and she pulled him down, and that's clear in the Zapruder film.
Do you think that it's strange that Connally said they're going to kill us all? A lot of people bring that up as evidence that there was a conspiracy and Connally knew about it because he said they're going to kill us all.
Well, that would certainly play into what I just read from his testimony before the Warren Commission. His initial thought, or his immediate thought, was that it was two or three people and it was automatic fire. It could have led into that. It also could have just been an excited blutterance. There are a lot of these kind of what I call blutterances or utterances, excited utterances at a time that is mass chaos and completely unexpected and quite emotional, where people just say things. It's the RFK case is replete with that as well, and it makes trying to determine whether or not there were in fact co-conspirators that people saw, one in particular in a polka dot dress, all the harder to establish, because you're focusing too much on something that someone says when a bullet had just passed through his body. You know, he knew the president was dead because brain matter just fell all over them. What do you say in something that's unexpected and chaotic and incredibly disturbing? Um, you're not going to say he's going to kill us all. You know, I think it's just a normal reaction. So I don't read too much into that. I know that other researchers have, and when you selectively take these things and then try to fit them into a preconceived conclusion, whether it's lone gunman or many gunmen, that's where we run into a problem. So I just attribute it to something that it is said in the unexpected moment.
Do you think that Connally pulled a lot of weight when it came to swaying people's opinions, like I mentioned with some of the members that changed their minds? But do you think that also kind of helped out with certain individuals that didn't want to look into conspiracy because Connally was stating that there was no conspiracy?
That's an excellent question, and unfortunately, I'm just not qualified to answer that. I don't know that much about Connally and his political life or his reputation. We know more about that, obviously LBJ, than Connally. So I haven't really looked into his stature as either a person or a politician or a governor to be able to say whether that held any sway with the members of the Warren Commission.
Did you know that he wrote to Oswald? Him and him had a correspondence at a point.
When Oswald was in the Marines, yes.
Yeah. Do you know if that was about his wife getting a visa, or do you think that was about getting his discharge from the service fixed?
I think it was the discharge from the service being fixed.
Okay. Marina brought this up in the HSCA, and it kind of left a lingering rumor in the community that has become more fact-based than it actually is, that there was a possibility that he could have been aiming at Connally instead of aiming at JFK.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I've heard that before. Again, I haven't delved too deeply into it, because when you take all of this into consideration, it doesn't ring true with me. If it was in fact a Connally hit and Kennedy was just in the crossfire, then there would be no Ruby shooting or shooting Oswald before he had to go to trial. There would be no destruction of evidence or repressing of evidence or any of the degree of cover up that existed. It simply would have been Oswald was politically motivated and was going after Connally.
But again,
it was that simple.
If it was politically motivated, then the Walker shooting wouldn't make sense to it. Well, I'm just saying.
And I'm just saying the Warren Commission had a hard time pinning any kind of motivation on Oswald because the evidence, in fact, showed the exact opposite, that he did not have any avarice towards Kennedy. He had no reason to shoot him. It was the only the only presidential assassination in our history of the four presidents that have been assassinated. This is the only one that wasn't that the government couldn't pin a politically motivated motivation on it.
Before I play the clips of this, I just want to let you know I was at a Beach Boy concert like last week, and they said the guy stopped, and they're all like 84. They did a eulogy for his brother who just passed away like a couple weeks ago when we were recording this. So it was all real sad, quiet, and everybody's listening to like the 84-year-old guy whisper to the microphone something. And he goes, "I want to tell you something, a story about in 1964." And after a few beers was like, Kennedy assassination wasn't Oswald. And I just started going, like, just screaming it. And then he literally started going, me and my brother, we got down, we wrote a song together, and then we turned on the TV. And this happened to be when John Kennedy was assassinated. And I go, no shit. And I just went like, I was like, yeah, as soon as anyone says 63, it's the first thing. It comes, it's always that. I'm going to play some of these clips now. I'm going to kind of go through a lot of what we talked about, a lot of questions that were brought up. The first one I'm going to play is actually Bob Blakey countering Nigel Turner, who did the documentary "The Men Who Killed Kennedy," because he states something in there you've stated a couple of times, and I just kind of want to clarify this when it comes to witnesses. Play this real quick.
The Warren Commission.
This is Robert Groden speaking.
26 volumes and a report, over 10 million words. In all those 10 million words, they very carefully avoided ever mentioning even once the rearward motion of the president when he struck. They never mentioned it once. They never looked at the autopsy photographs. They never presented them as evidence.
We looked at them.
I know you looked at them.
You were given the opportunity when you worked for us to look at them. And your positions were not established in the light of the testimony of the other photographic people and the autopsy people. You really ought not to continue to take this position when there is simply no evidence to support it.
James, please let me answer that. Let me answer that. We have every single doctor, every nurse, every eyewitness in Dealey Plaza that describes the president's head wounds as having a massive exit wound in the rear of the head.
And as between photographs of his body and somebody's memory, as between which you can still go look at, as between somebody's memory and the X-rays, which shall we rely on?
In this certain situation, I think eyewitness testimony holds a little bit more weight than exactly the forensic and all the other evidence that can be altered by the people that you're suspecting of being behind the conspiracy, or at least the cover-up, which we know is 100% fact evidence-based, that there was one conclusion on this. There was no other thing.
I completely agree. And it's very important to contextualize this because, well, Blakey's talking out of his ass, number one. And Robert Groden was prescient in his trying to establish that the photographs don't match up. Because of the work of the Assassination Record and Review Board, we do now know that the autopsy photographs are even less in doubt about their authenticity than ever before, because they did in fact talk to, as Blakey said, the photographic people from HSCA. There was testimony of people who actually developed the films, the X-rays, and it was established that they used a different kind of film than the photographs that are in the National Archives and the X-rays as well. So, but the point of Robert Groden, talking about all of the doctors, nurses, and technicians at Parkland Hospital, is it more likely that evidence that was controlled by the government and purposely controlled by the government, which is why Kennedy's body was taken from Dallas and taken to Bethesda, so they could control the outcome, but also the evidence being released. They could control the release of the evidence. That evidence, which was already called into question from the second that anybody knew about it, to the professional, non-political opinions of trauma surgeons, doctors, nurses, and technicians at Parkland Hospital. You cannot reconcile that without calling all of them at Parkland Hospital incompetent, or that they're part of it. They're part of the conspiracy to undermine the Warren Commission and its conclusions. It's just silly. So that's where context really comes into play here. The evidence out of Parkland was incredibly strong for not just a frontal shot to the head, but also a frontal shot to the neck. And because the autopsy then, the official autopsy, was so incompetent and so bad, it has led to 6 decades of all of this arguing about it. Because it wasn't authoritative, because the pathologists at Bethesda never talked prior to them doing the autopsy to the doctors at Parkland Hospital. All the conclusions of that autopsy were called into question. They're called into question for lots of reasons, but that's one of the main ones.
I'm going to play this one. Again, we're not staying on Weck yet because we haven't gotten there, but this was just adds to the point of the evidence. This was Weck talking about the evidence in the case.
Some questions concerning the head wound and the possibility, albeit remote, of a second shot fired in synchronized fashion from the right side or the lower right rear, synchronized with the headshot that struck the president in the back of the head. And this is related to a couple pieces of evidence, and again emphasizes the necessity of having the brain to examine. These are the major areas. There are, of course, numerous facets of all of these disagreements that relate to the so-called single bullet theory.
Dr. Weck, is it your opinion that no bullet could have caused all of the wounds to President Kennedy and Governor Connally, or that CE-399 could not have caused all of the wounds to both men?
Based upon the findings in this case, it is my opinion that no bullet could have caused all these wounds, not only 399, but no other bullet that we know about, or any fragment of a bullet that we know about in this case.
Again, he said based on the findings, that means what they have available, not anything else. You have to listen to that specifically. He states it multiple times, but after a while, the same question keeps getting asked. It doesn't come out as clear as it did maybe the first time he did it. Now, what he said about the evidence, missing brain, missing autopsy material, Doug Horn says that how do you have a lone nut assassination where the autopsy changed 4 times in 2 weeks? Again, these are things that are manipulated, that are gone, that have disappeared, that would show a clear thing if there was a second shot or from a different angle or something that happened to go that messes with the official narrative in any sense of the word. Bullet fragments that are missing. We have Walter Evans, who found a piece of the brain, a piece of the skull in the street around 7:30 at night in front of the Texas School Book Depository. We have the Harper fragment that has been missing from evidence that could have been taken by Berkeley or whoever. It is gone. These are all pieces of evidence that could have been used to support that there was another thing or another direction of where the headshot goes. And again, that gets into autopsy changes, that gets into certain things that, or doctors have different discrepancies. How could this be possible? That's why I think witness testimony has a little bit more reliable when we're examining certain things that happen to do with just the evidence in the case, because it's really difficult to try and examine, like, are they fake drawings? Are they real drawings? Did Baden influence Ida Docs to draw specific things that didn't fit the actual descriptions of what they were looking at? Did Baden see fake x-rays? Again, it gets into, much like this Zapruder film alteration, it becomes more of a problem on things. But I wanted to go into more about the information that Connally could have received to develop the thoughts that he had. Connally stating that he was not hit by the second shot. Again, this is I'm not going to say it's an issue. It's something that does not agree with the official narrative. And it's something where if he's having that standpoint, how can he still agree with the same conclusions? So I'm going to play a video testimony, then I'm going to play his HSCA testimony, and you can kind of get a better depiction of where he's coming from. So this is one of the video ones where he said that they were hit with 3 shots, but he kind of describes it.
As we turn to go down to enter the freeway, the first inkling that, of course, that I had that anything was amiss, I heard a shot, what I thought was a shot. Others said a sound, but I thought it was a shot. I'd heard too many rifle shots in my life not to be able to identify one, and no thought crossed my mind except that it was a rifle shot. I was conscious then of hearing a third shot. I say a third shot. I was not conscious really of hearing the second shot, the bullet that hit me. I very clearly heard the third one. They were coming in very rapid fire order, and I knew as a result of the third shot that someone certainly, and I assume the president, had been hit a fatal blow.
Now, again, he's saying he's identifying the second shot as hitting him. You watch the Zapruder film, you see Kennedy grab his neck. Connally is turning around to his right, and then he turns around again to try and turn to his left, and that's when you see Connally wince. Here's Connally's HSCA testimony.
Being a participant, I can only give you my impressions, but I must say to you, as I said to the Warren Commission, I do not believe, nor will I ever believe, that I was hit with the first bullet. I don't believe it. I heard the shot. I heard the first shot.
See Connally turning around. That's flame 264 right there. We see Connally turning around and looking at the president. He has not been hit yet. Do you have anything written down, Greg, Craig, that might be different from this?
No, that's a very good frame. It's one of the ones that I was talking about. Actually, I had 266. But you look at Jackie is looking directly at Connally. Connally is almost completely upright and turned to look at the president. As you can see that the white in his hand, it's his cuff of his collar, of his shirt collar, or cuff, his hand, and then his white Stetson hat. As Cyril Wecht pointed out, not only in his House Committee assassination testimony, but also when he, quote unquote, testified in 1986 for a Showtime special called The Trial of Lee Harvey Oswald, he doesn't use 264 as an indication that he hasn't been hit yet, but in fact, he uses 230. So he argues, which was a couple of seconds before this. So he argues that he's looking ahead. He's still holding his Stetson hat, clenched between his ring finger or his first finger and his thumb, but his radial nerve had been almost completely severed, which would have allowed him to hold things in that position. But Wecht's interpretation of the Zapruder film puts this moment 2 seconds or 2 or 3 seconds before this at 230 instead of 264. So, in my opinion, looking at the Zapruder film, Connally has still not been hit at 264.
I agree with that
for the same reasons that because he hasn't been pulled down yet. Remember, Nellie Connally said after he was hit and he was screaming like a stuck pig, which is what Jackie said, that Nellie pulled him down. Well, he's almost completely upright. You got to remember that he's contorting himself. This very large man is contorting himself in a jump seat in the back of a limousine, and so he's contorting himself. And if his shoulder goes down, it's because he's trying to turn, not because he was driven down because of the impact of a bullet. Even though this is what he said in his testimony, that it felt like somebody had hit him in the back. So, again, you pick and choose these things, but I'm looking at this man. If he had been shot through the chest, through the wrist, and the bullet now lays in his left thigh, there is absolutely no indication of it whatsoever. He's still holding his hat. There's no blood on the cuff, and Nellie hasn't pulled him in. So anyway, that's a very good.
I reacted to the first shot, and I was not hit with that bullet. Now, a great deal of speculation that the president and I were hit with the same bullet. That might well be, but it surely wasn't the first bullet. And Nellie doesn't think it's the second bullet. I don't know. I didn't hear the second bullet. I felt the second bullet. We obviously weren't hit with the third bullet. I was down, reclining in her lap at the time the third bullet hit. I'm sorry.
And actually, he wasn't. But again, this is part of eyewitness testimony that you have to weigh very carefully. It was after Kennedy's head exploded that she pulled him all the way into her lap. And I mean, that's clear in the film.
I'm going to play this one. It's about the rifle shots. Samuel Devine asking Mr. Connally. He had identified them as rifle shots.
Governor, I think you testified that you heard but 2 shots and that you don't think that you heard the shot that struck you. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And both of these came from over your right shoulder?
Yes, sir. From behind me and over my back behind me over my right shoulder. That's correct.
The first shot that you heard, which caused you to look to your right, I think you said you didn't get far enough around to see the president. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
But that is not accurate.
Found as being a rifle shot or a handgun shot?
I thought it was a rifle shot.
And then you turned around and started to turn around to look over your left shoulder to see what?
See if the president was all right, because immediately the thought flashed through my mind that if this was a rifle shot, which I believed it to be, that it was probably an assassination attempt, and I was trying to see if anything had happened in the automobile.
Again, you said it wasn't correct. I mean, it looks like he doesn't get a full, complete turn over his right shoulder before he starts turning to his left to go look over his left shoulder. That makes sense to me.
No, I mean the one that you just showed, 246. It actually starts at 238 to 246. He completely looks around.
Again, that's what I'm saying is that when he heard the first shot, what they're saying is when he heard the first shot, he was looking over his right shoulder to look at the president, couldn't see the president, and then turned left to look over his left shoulder to get a view if the president was okay. That's accurate.
And that's not what I see. What I see is that it took him a while to get around because, like I said, he's cramped. He's got his big ass 10-gallon hat in his hand, and he's trying to turn around with very very little room. So he fumbles a bit, and his shoulder goes down, which is the Warren Commission or the FBI or both interpreting that as him being shot. But then he finally is able to turn around, and he is in fact looking. Once you give me control of the screen, I can show you the Zapruder film frames.
All right, we'll do that.
But yeah, but some of the things that in the couple of clips that you played of Connally, again, we have to take testimony very, very carefully. He called it rapid fire, which most people who gave descriptions of the sequence of the shots, it was never rapid fire. Almost 3 seconds between the shots is not rapid fire. There are those who also said that the second and third were on top of each other, which again indicates the possibility of more than one gun because you just can't fire that fast. And again, he was hit with a second bullet, he said, but never heard it, which leads into the Warren Commission actually being able to conclude that he was suffering from a delayed reaction, that he heard the first shot but didn't feel it until much later. And then, of course, Wecht is one of many doctors who make a big deal of that. You can't have a delayed reaction when your fifth rib is completely shattered, your lung is collapsing, the wrist, which is very, very thick and has so many nerves in it, you can't suffer a delayed reaction when you're struck like that. But just a few curious things that Connally said in his testimony.
Okay, keep making notes. We'll go over it afterwards. Delay after the first shot by Louis Stokes and Harold S. Sawyer.
During the recess, I had discussed with Professor Blakey my concerns and your concerns about this reaction time.
Well, the ones that, of course, they were pretty much out of range of being any help to the president. I mean, they may have, in this kind of a circumstance anyway. But the two agents in the car, by just jamming the accelerator on that first shot, might arguably have done some good. And yet there was, until the third shot, which I guess spans a time frame of some 7 or 8 seconds, which, while it might not, sound like a long time, it's time enough for somebody to run 75 yards if they're a sprinter, that they could have wheeled that car. It seemed to me a lot quicker than they reacted. And I just, and I recognize that if you're not expecting a thing, it takes you a little while to gather your wits what's happening. But if your mental attitude is, as I said before, a sprinter on the starting blocks, you're waiting for the gun. If you're attuned to that, your reaction time is much quicker.
This is them questioning James Rowley about their Secret Service reaction time, because Rowley was spending a lot of time excusing his Secret Service rather than trying to analyze the problems that were going on with just certain things going on with the Secret Service. This is, I actually wanted to play this one, which was excusing the driver. It's James Rowley.
The driver is concerned, incidentally, it was an armored car, which carries considerable weight.
But with no top.
No top, no.
Doesn't matter.
But it's still heavy on the body.
Yeah.
The motorcycles, when you're involved in one of those motorcades, and there are people shouting and they're claiming the individuals, and the motorcycles, at times they could slow down, then they have to kick the motor, and then it explodes and so forth. These agents have been used to that, so that when the second shot went high, they assume, because their concentration in the meantime is on the public and the people there, which may sometimes they're oblivious of what the noise that's going on. In other words, to distinguish between a backfire and a rifle shot.
And again, this is where Sawyer brought up the fact that, well, Connally was able to identify it specifically as being a rifle shot. So I don't know how you could not identify it as, or your Secret Service could not identify it as being a rifle shot. Again, this is something where You know, these are good questions that were asked about, like, watch it. These are good questions that are asked by the HSCA.
As I said to a previous witness, I have been very impressed in watching the Zapruder film, the slowness of the reaction of the agents compared to the reaction of Governor Connally. And I think for anyone watching that, it's perfectly obvious that they were not really alertly attuned to the possibility of some catastrophic event like that happening. And I just wonder if there's been some effort to, in effect, instill an approach that instead of it being the unexpected, it's the expected, and they're just waiting for it to happen, which might have increased their reaction time and might have saved the president. I think there's an exhibit from the Warren Commission that shows that one of the cars had the door swung open, apparently after the first shot, in which two agents were attempting to get out at about that time, which may not have been in the Zapruder film.
Again, this is stuff.
It wasn't. It was in the Altgens photo that was shown in this clip. He's absolutely right. I just wrote it down, and he said it for me. The reaction time of other Secret Service agents, that is, Secret Service agents for Johnson, were already reacting. So him trying to justify why his Secret Service agents, who are charged with protecting the president and Mrs. Connally and Mrs. Connally, why they did not react, except for Clint Hill, and that was only after the second shot had fired, or what Clint Hill described as the. Actually, he said he started to jump off the running board after the first shot.
Again, Clint Hill also, he was the only one that reacted. It was brought up. And then the HSCA even asked Rowley, like, so you're telling me, Clint Hill, your reaction or your basis of the good reaction time of the Secret Service is based on Clint Hill, the only one that reacted? And again, he was making an excuse for the driver, saying the car was heavy. It takes a while for it to speed up. Well, apparently, from all accounts, based on John Connally and Nellie Connally, that once that car started going, it went. Felt like they were going like 100 miles an hour, he said, before he went unconscious.
Yep, so, and let's not forget the eyewitness testimony of the car slowing down, stopping, even seeing brake lights.
Twice.
So it's we can, and I'm sure the analysis has already been done. I just can't think of it. You can now measure the speed of the car on the Zapruder film and actually track how fast it's going and whether or not, in fact, it slowed down or stopped.
This goes to the question of the bulletproof car.
This picture that fellow sold for $25,000. That was a picture taken of the parade and showing Mrs. Kennedy climbing out of the back seat. You see, there was no Secret Service man standing on the back of the car. Usually, the presidential car in the past has had steps on the back next to the bumpers, and there have usually been one on either side standing on those steps at the back bumper. Whether the president asked that that not be done, we don't know. And the bubble top was not up, but the bubble top wasn't worth a damn anyway because it made entirely of plastic. And much to my surprise, the Secret Service do not have any armored cars. Do you have a bulletproof car? Well, yes, I do. Yes, I think I ought to have one. I think you most certainly should have one. Most certainly should. Because I have one here. We have one in New York. We use it for different purposes. I use it here for myself, and if we have any raids to make or have to surround a place where anybody's hidden in, we use the bulletproof car on that. Because you can bulletproof the entire car, including the glass. But it means that the top has to remain up. You can never let the top down. It's very limiting tight. And looks exactly like any other car, but I do think you ought to have a bulletproof car.
I just love it how they flip it to themselves.
He does have a bulletproof car. It's called the presidential limousine. And Johnson, in fact, did use Kennedy's limousine again after it was cleaned out and refitted with things. And here that still right there, that's also an Altgens photograph. You can see Clint Hill using not only that there's a step on the bumper, but also that there's a handrail on either side of the back the trunk of the limousine, so that agents can in fact ride on it if it's necessary. In this motorcade from Love Field, the airport in Dallas, to Dealey Plaza, Clint Hill had to ride that bumper a couple of times. We have photographs of it, of him actually riding that bumper. I don't know if the other Secret Service agent on the other side. I believe it was Paul Reddy who was opposite of, or was it Paul Landis? Either John Reddy or Paul Landis. No, I think it was Reddy. Who was riding the bumper closest to Kennedy, opposite of Clint Hill. I don't know if he ever rode on that bumper of the presidential limousine, but J. Edgar Hoover talking about how he thinks there were steps there were handrails there so that agents could ride the bumper. Kennedy didn't call them off. He simply told them to use their discretion, that he didn't want them there permanently throughout the entire motorcade, but if it's necessary in parts of the motorcade where the crowds are incredibly concentrated or anything like that, then please do it. So
there's a statement from John Connally there about the HSCA, and it kind of goes to the point of like what you've said before about JFK wanting to be close to the people, like RFK was, with how he had to keep changing his his cufflinks because he kept getting like stolen or it kept getting scratched up or worn down from people handshaking too many times or something like that.
No, they I mean, when they grabbed him, they just took it with them.
Yeah.
So yes, he lost a lot of cufflinks because of that.
John Connally stated that there was only one awkward interaction in the motorcade while they were driving through, and it was between John and Jackie. Many times Jackie was wearing these giant sunglasses, and 3 times John had to tell her to take the sunglasses off. And it became a little awkward in the car, just because it just was in a weird way, like, take your glasses off, Jackie. Like, he had to keep saying it over and over again. And again, that goes to that point of the wanting to be close to the people aspect of things, but doesn't also go to the point that he didn't want his Secret Service protecting his life. You know what I mean? It gets to these weird kind of conflictions where people go, JFK didn't like Secret Service. He didn't want any of them around him. First of all, the only president that I know is recorded of not liking Secret Service and not wanting any of them around him is LBJ. That guy, I have 5 different phone calls where he's like, they're going to, first of all, he says this 4 times, ready? He goes, those dummies with a gun might as well fall over and let the gun go off and get me killed. I go, he said that 4 different times. In different years, he used that excuse. He said, all these little guys lined up like little tin soldiers, barely have any experience with any guns, likely go fall over each other and have the gun go off and get me killed. Now, I heard that and I was like, all right, damn it. Like, that's a very specific, man. That's not like something where it's like you're just tossing out like a weird Texas saying. You're going off and say something like that. And he talked about how the damn driver's driving up so close to me, I'm going to hit my brakes, and next thing I know, I'm going to get whiplash. And, I have 4 family members that got things wrong with their necks, and I'm telling you, it's going to happen. I don't want these damn Secret Service over. J. Edgar Hoover said he could supply more men to me that would be better prepared for it, and I might take him up on that.
James Rowley should have been asked about that.
This is the reactions inside the limousine, but based on Nellie Connally's statements.
He said nothing. He just sort of slumped down in the seat. John had turned to his right also when we heard that first noise and shouted, no, 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 and in the process of turning back around so that he could look back and see the president, I don't think he could see him when he turned to his right. The second shot was fired and hit him. He was in the process of turning, so it hit him through this shoulder, came out right about here. His hand was either right in front of him or on his knee as he turned to look, so that the bullet went through him, crushed his wrist, and lodged in his leg.
That's Nellie Connally's statements.
Yep. So she was talking about the throat shot. After the throat shot, Kennedy didn't say anything. But then there's Kellerman, who thought he swore that in that Boston accent, he heard the president say, "Oh my God, I've been shot." And of course, this is what leads the incompetence of the handling of all the medical evidence in this case. The pathologists who did the autopsy at Bethesda on President Kennedy never examined the neck wounds or the neck because they thought it was too intrusive. It wasn't necessary. In fact, there were arguments at the beginning of whether a full autopsy should be done or just an autopsy of President Kennedy's head. But then Robert Kennedy finally acquiesced and said, no, you can do a complete autopsy. But the fact that pathologists were even concerning themselves with the destruction of the president's body. See, this is the thing. If you can't separate yourself from your job and the politics of what's happening, or the historic significance of what's happening, then you shouldn't be doing this. Then you cannot be a professional. As far as the pathologists were concerned, he should have been Jane Doe, not the president of the United States, despite all of the chaos that's around their autopsy room, which again, they didn't control. Thomas Noguchi, who did Robert Kennedy's autopsy, not only controlled the autopsy room and who was in there and who could be allowed in there, but he also had to place a towel over Robert Kennedy's face so that he wouldn't be reminded constantly of who he was doing an autopsy on. So he was separating himself. He was being as professional as he possibly could. But the fact that the pathologists in Bethesda didn't do that, it led to such omissions as, well, you have a bullet wound through the throat and you don't dissect that, you don't dissect the organs of the throat to be able to either track the bullet or to see what damage there was from the bullet. So we don't know whether there was enough damage to his trachea that he could or could not have said anything. So that when there's a conflict between when Nellie Connally says that he didn't say anything, and Roy Kellerman, who was a Secret Service agent in the passenger seat of the presidential limousine, when he said he did say something, we've got eyewitness testimony that's conflicting in who do you believe. It's all
shot that you heard.
Sorry. So that's all right. Yeah. So again, Nellie Connally is talking about her husband's reactions in the limousine, about his hand being in his lap. Only one of his hands was in his lap. His other hand clearly is holding his Stetson hat. But again, because of how crammed he was, yeah. So
I'm going to play this one. It's What's Your Opinion, Nellie Connally by Samuel Devine.
Second shot that you heard is the one you believe hit Governor Connally.
I know it hit Governor Connally.
And then after you knew that he was hit and you pulled him over in your lap, you then heard the third shot.
Yes.
And again from over your right shoulder?
Yes.
Did you look back at that time?
I never looked back after John was hit.
Have you had any experience at all with firearms over the years? Would you say in your judgment that the shot that you heard or the shots that you heard were from a rifle or a handgun?
Oh, no, I'm not that much of a...
You don't know, but...
And I'm not expert at all.
All right.
And then I'm going to play...
So I was not aware that she had specifically contradicted John. I thought that their testimonies were fairly consistent and close. She said that he was hit by the second shot, where he's saying he was not hit by, well, the first shot. He didn't hear the second shot, but she did. So
she heard the second shot and she heard the third shot. Connally didn't remember hearing a third shot. He remembers just being hit by the second shot. So this one is John Connally Changed Our Minds. It's by John Sherman Cooper.
Connally was certain it hadn't. He said, I know guns. I rifle. I fire them all the time. When I heard the shot, I looked immediately over my right shoulder, which was the place where Oswald was working. And then I turned around and I was hit. His testimony was very convincing, and of course you know from everything we know about him, he's a very forceful man. And he convinced Dick Russell, and I must say he convinced me that the other was too intangible. It made it more difficult to say that Oswald was the sole assassin, because the shots would have had to been very close together, and it would have to be a very good marksman. But anyway, we said that we held to the Connally theory. So most of the others were for the two-shot theory. But we finally wrote into our summary that there had been two views, and gave the explanation.
Now, a lot of Warren Commission members wanted a subsection of the report to say what their dissent and what they disagreed on certain things, but that was not included into the Warren Commission report. There is a section about dissent, but it was not exactly what they wanted amended to the summary one that they released.
Absolutely.
The HSCA
says they had to be unanimous.
The HSCA has a section all about dissent. Robert Edgar did not believe about the classification of identifying as Oswald's rifle and things of that sort because he believed that the tests were not accurate or he had questions about the test. A lot of other HSCA members had doubts on the magic bullet theory and other things. There's after this one I can play. I'm not going to play WEC just yet.
Well, hold on. So I you just closed it, and you don't have to play it again. But did he say didn't he say that Oswald was a very good marksman?
No, he said that the guy would have to be a very good marksman.
Okay, thank you. And he said that he was looking back where Oswald was. Connally looked back to his rear because that's where Oswald was. No, that's not why Connally looked back. He looked back to see President Kennedy.
This is They're Gonna Kill Us All by John Connally.
I said first, just almost in despair, I said, no, 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 no. Just thinking how tragic it was that we'd gone through this 24 hours that had all been so wonderful and so beautifully executed. The president had been so marvelously received, and then here at the last moment, this great tragedy. And I just said, no, 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 no. And then I said, right after I was hit, I said, my God, they're going to kill us all. The shots came, in my judgment, the two shots I heard came from the same direction, back over my right shoulder, came from behind us. I don't think any shots came from any other direction.
Again, that conflicts with, stays on the conclusion basis of where the shots came from with the Warren Commission, but again, his testimony is kind of conflicting. Can't say that if you only heard two shots, you can't say that you heard no shots from other, or you don't believe that there's any shots from other directions because you don't know, because you didn't know where the third one came from.
And once again, over your right shoulder is three different buildings.
I'm gonna play. There is, before I get into some things about understanding Connally's perspective of why he decided to stay on the par with the conclusion, but also get to the point of saying that he did not agree with the same bullet hitting me and Kennedy. This one is going to be Marilyn Zitzman. She was the one holding Abraham Zapruder. This is her testimony after all these years.
Did I understand you correctly that you do feel there was somebody behind the picket fence?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I do believe that some of the shots did come from that direction.
But it's not because you heard the shots, it's because of what you...
Because of other things, yes.
Were you part of the official investigation? I mean, they came to interview Mr. Zapruder, but nobody ever...
I was totally ignored. Nobody from Warren talked to me, nobody of the FBI, none of the Secret Service, nobody. Absolutely nothing. After I got back to the office, nobody could have cared if I dropped dead myself.
Does it seem strange to you that somebody as close to the scene as you were would not at least be just questioned as we're doing?
Just voted off to MCP, I guess, because I was just totally ignored. I don't think we'll ever know, and I don't think Oswald did it.
You don't think he was involved at all, or you?
I think he's just exactly what he said he was Patsy.
Now, she changed her opinion based on all the information, all the documentaries and JFK stuff that came out later. But again, rightfully so. If the government did a proper investigation and we didn't have all these holes in the official thing, there wouldn't need to be all these doubts, all these people later.
Absolutely. Do you happen to know when that interview was?
It was done by the Sixth Floor Museum sometime in like the 2000s. Maybe earlier.
The quality of it. They started their oral history program in 89, so that's probably 89 or 90. But it was Josiah Thompson, the author of 6 Seconds in Dallas, who was the earliest researcher to interview Marilyn Zitzman. So that's what I have in my book, and I go over what she said there. So
I wanted to poke another hole in the LBJ phone call. Again, we're going to start. Well, hold on. This is going to be the one that's going to talk on the 29th about with Hoover talking about the evidence. I want to state that Connally having these difference of opinion. Now, he is now part of the cover-up. If he's not going to state things and he's going to address shooting down critics, he is now, in my opinion, part of the cover-up. So not necessarily part of the conspiracy. One thing is, though, was he told this information by J. Edgar Hoover, and much of this phone call conversation from the 29th, anybody can go look it up and hear the full 20 minutes yourself. There's a lot of things said with confidence that we have learned not to be true. I'm going to show you a clear example with this one right here. Hold on. Play this first.
AM fired at me. No, there was all three at the president. All three at the president, and we have them. Two of the shots fired at the president were splintered, but they had characteristics on them so that our ballistic expert was able to prove that they were fired by this gun.
The panel could not match their own test-fired bullets with either the FBI's tests from '63 or the so-called pristine bullet that's been so much talked about. One of the reasons theorized that a match could not be made was that the rifle had been fired too often, somehow destroying or altering the land and groove markings. Does anyone on the panel know how many times the weapon was fired by the FBI?
Are you referring just to the FBI firing it or the number of times it was actually fired?
To rephrase the question, I'm informed by counsel that the weapon has been fired over 100 times. That's sufficient wear that it would significantly alter the markings and the identification?
Yes, I think that with this type of weapon and the type of bullets involved, it is. I think that probably the weapon has been fired more than 100 times.
Again, so the confidence that was said in that phone call by J. Edgar Hoover talking about the ballistics were not identified. WEC was able to prove this and talk about they never even did the proper testing in '63. But if you're told that by someone who's leading the investigation as for the official part of the Warren Commission, Connally accepted him maybe at face value, and that's why his opinion was what it was, because it couldn't be conspiracy because the FBI had proved that it wasn't. So again, is Connally lying because he's a part of the conspiracy, or is he being told information himself that is wrong, but he is sticking with the stance of his viewpoint of how he was shot and what he felt at the moment, that he is positive that he was not hit with the same bullet?
That is a critical point that people have to keep in mind. That is he persuaded by the institutions that in 1963 were still deeply believed and believed in? So one of the reasons why we had so many people in the United States at the time believe the Warren Commission is, again, because of the authority that that institution garnered, that people still believed in institutions. That's why you had the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court leading the Warren Commission, and then all of those other, well, it's been said, sacred cows of finance and banking, of politics, because we had Representative Gerald Ford and so forth and so on. So people believed in their institutions still. We hadn't had Watergate. There wasn't a serious doubt about the integrity of all of our institutions. So when you have somebody like J. Edgar Hoover, who was in his position of power for nearly 50 years, which is unheard of, then yes, I cannot discount that kind of, not unintentional pressure, but just that kind of pressure brought about simply because of the nature of who's telling him the summarizing the evidence. As you just pointed out, it's incorrect. When you look at the date of that phone call was on the 29th of November. That's a week after the assassination. They're already concluding. The FBI has already concluded who did it, how he did it, and they hadn't even done ballistics tests yet. They still hadn't gathered all the evidence yet. They still had not. The Warren Commission hadn't either. Anyway, the Warren Commission had just met on the 29th. So the fact that the FBI came to their conclusions and wrapped up this case, and then basically gave the Warren Commission their report, again, before witnesses were called, before all of the tests, ballistics tests had been done, even before the autopsy report had been submitted. You got the FBI saying that this is how it happened, and the pressure then was on the Warren Commission. But hearing that kind of summary of the evidence by somebody like J. Edgar Hoover, I have no doubt would have made Connally pause.
This is why I use the scope.
There's no question about that. This telescopic lens, which I've looked through, it brings a person as close to you as if they were sitting right beside you. And we also have tested the fact that you could fire, those 3 shots were fired within 3 seconds. There's been some stories going around the papers and so forth that that must have been more than one man, because no one man could fire those shots in the time that they were fired. We've disproved that by the actual test that we've made.
Under it,
I can place it into a better position by putting my cheek on the stock, finger on the trigger, and I have a more solid position and an easier position to recover to once the rifle has fired and the recoil has been counted.
Are you indicating that in rapid fire use of that rifle, it would probably be easier to use the rifle without using the scope?
For me, it would be considerably easier, yes.
Considering the physical layout of Dealey Plaza, would the shots at the president have been more feasible without a scope for a person of less than marksman proficiency? In other words, for someone not as proficient as a police sharpshooter?
I believe that it would. The ability to grasp the rifle and put it into the shoulder and recover after each firing is considerably easier using just the iron sights.
So again, was the scope on the rifle because it would have made the shots more easier for him to be able to hit, based on what the FBI might have been viewing if they're going to look at pinning the blame on someone? Well, if he did it without the iron sights, and he'd have to have expert marksmanship. And again, there's conflating accounts of what his marksmanship was. A lot of people say his marksmanship was not good at all, and have stated that. And again, even with what do you call it? The statements, if you look it up on Google or you just type it in, the official narrative says that Oswald had a complicated relationship with Kennedy. Some accounts say that he was negative towards Kennedy, and some accounts said he was positive towards Kennedy. All accounts from his wife and the people that matter stated he never said a bad word about JFK. He said good things only about Kennedy and only admired the fact that a young president who was handsome could reach this feat of being the president of the United States and being in charge and being responsible for so many people.
But even if you have some negative, even if you have people who said that he had criticisms of Kennedy, certainly nothing to rise to the level of wanting to end his life by killing the president.
So again, if you're the FBI planning, or Dallas Police Department planning evidence, and you found Oswald's rifle and you put that scope on the rifle just to make these shots more feasible, could it reach the time? Again, Hoover's conflicting himself because apparently it's faster without the scope to even get closer to that time.
Yes, but okay. So the only reason to bring this subject up is because Oswald ordered the scope separately, and it had to be put on, and it was put on wrong. So that in fact the FBI, before they test fired it, had to take it off, or not take it off, but they had to put shims underneath it to level it out. So even the scope itself was defective when the FBI got a hold of it. But there's really no other reason other than that to ask the question, did he use the iron sights or did he use the telescopic lens? Well, it really is immaterial. Even more so is, I'm not sure from that distance, did anybody ask the question, if you're using the iron sights, could you have seen that Kennedy's head exploded from the window? If you're looking through the iron sights, because that's the only reason why he would have loaded the fourth bullet into the chamber but not taken the shot, is because he knew that he had hit his target.
I'm gonna hold on.
As far as Oswald's marksmanship, yes, you can argue about what his record said, although I think his record is pretty clear, his marksmanship from the Marines. But the last time that the government, the Warren Commission, the FBI, even House Select Committee on Assassinations, could put a weapon in his hand and firing it is 1959. So however good of a marksman you think he was in 1959, to maintain that, to retain that, you have to keep practicing. And if you go 4 years without firing a rifle, without owning a rifle, and then suddenly buy one through the mail and then do dry runs in the darkness of your back porch, that's not going to do it to rise to the level of being able to get these kinds of shots off. And you saw right there, Hoover lied to the president of the United States. He created this false narrative that people were saying that you couldn't fire this fast. Nobody knew. The Zapruder film hadn't been released. We couldn't see the time between the supposed reactions of Kennedy and Connally to be able to say how long it took these shots to be fired and how long it took the bolt to be used or rechambered. So we know that this weapon could not be fired. It could not fire 3 times in 3 seconds.
I want to play this, which is the Robert Edgar talking to Marina Oswald about the scope on Oswald's rifle when she took the backyard photographs.
Do you recall when you first saw this rifle, whether it had a scope on it?
I would not remember that at all.
Do you know what a scope is?
Well, I learned late, since all this happened, what the scope is.
Okay.
But I don't know that much about rifles.
Well,
nothing at all.
Thinking back, can you recall whether the rifle had a scope on it? It would be attached to the rifle. Can you recall?
No, I don't.
When did you learn the difference between rifles with and without scopes?
I really did not learn the difference. I just know what the scope more or less is right now.
Okay.
That it's attachment that make it target more visible.
But did you know then what a scope was?
No.
So again, the historical record has Oswald's wife identifying his rifle as the sniper nest thing. She also states that she could not identify the difference between a rifle and a shotgun and didn't know the difference between a rifle and a shotgun. Could she be remembering the thing from Russia that he brought over? You know, was it a rifle or was it a shotgun? Again, makes her an unreliable witness. I got one more I haven't seen in a while.
Well, an unreliable witness on that particular point.
Yeah, that part.
The distance from the
I'm going to play this one by Floyd Fithian of the HSCA questioning the sniper's nest.
distance from the window where Oswald was supposed to have been located to the president was 165 feet. With that weapon, which you now have inspected and fired, test fired, how difficult a shot is it with the scope or without the scope?
The answer I would give, I believe, would be that it would not appear to be a difficult shot with either device, with reasonable training or a reasonable capability of a firer that was familiar with that firearm. I personally feel that the iron sights would have provided a better capability because of the problems of sighting through the other device, through the telescopic sight, but I feel that it could have very easily been accomplished.
And with the car moving at the estimated speed?
I still feel that it would not have been a difficult target at that distance.
Again, what he experienced.
And let us recall, and who is that gentleman who is testifying for HSCA?
Monty Lutz.
Okay. So it may not be difficult for him. Maybe he's an expert marksman. But the fact of the matter is that the FBI in 1964 certainly thought that it was a difficult shot because none of their marksmen could do it. And they were test firing the rifle under much better circumstances than Oswald had. They had as much time as they wanted for the first shot, whereas Oswald or whoever was in the sniper's nest, if you believe that someone was in the sniper's nest, they were under pressure because there was a moving car and a limited window in which to get your shots off. They were not, the marksmen were not as high, and they were at a stationary, they were shooting at a stationary target, not a moving target. So even under the heightened conditions, the better conditions, they still could not do it with that piece of shit rifle.
This is,
and then, of course, we just heard testimony from one of these shorts that you played that if the rifle was fired over 100 times to test fire it, which you don't need that many times to test fire and to supply test bullets for you, it actually denigrated the rifle itself. So it was not a good weapon. And so for him to say that it was an easy shot, again, is subjective. We can find just as many marksmen who say no, it wasn't an easy shot. But even making that kind of statement, there's not enough context in which for that statement to hold any weight.
I want to get to talking about Connally and him, what his statements were, where you can blame him for things, and this is one of them. Again, he might have had an influence from J. Edgar Hoover telling him things. This is just addressing the critics.
In the backlash of tragedy, journalistic scavengers, such as Mark Lane, attempt to impugn the motives of these members individually, cast doubts upon the commission as a whole, and question the credibility of the government itself. We should turn our attention to doing a little research on and evaluation of the credentials of these self-appointed experts who, with no evidence, no new facts, nevertheless use distortion, inference, innuendo in order to cast doubts and create confusion. Now, I think it's time that we pause and reflect on who these individuals are, rather than calling for a further investigation of the assassination, which in my judgment is neither warranted, justified, or desirable.
Again,
that is disturbing. That
again,
really is disturbing.
He says this that makes me understand why he wouldn't want to do this. But again, this is from a whole separate interview, so I don't know if he explained this in that interview. But this is something he said prior.
First, you said that you received a number of letters that in some way or other faulted you the assassination. Have these letters continued, or are they kind of...
No, those letters have stopped. I've not received any such letters in several months now. And I never worried about them, particularly in relation to me. I worried about them only in the sense that I think they reflected a strange attitude in the minds of so many people in the country. I was concerned from that standpoint, but not because the letters themselves accused me of being responsible for the president's tragic death, just because I was riding with him.
Again, I think that's also why he didn't want a lot of the conspiracy stuff and these words to come out and rumors and things and possible theories, because of the fact that he probably was receiving letters threatening him and saying that he was responsible. And obviously you could tell he's going through his own little thing right now dealing with that. It's very emotional testimony there, whether you believe it or not. But again, he also states things like this.
Left leg, which was fairly deeply embedded, and they didn't attempt to probe to get it out because they thought it would be of no harm to me, whatever, caused me no discomfort. It's been worse to try to dig it out. That's my memory of 3 years ago, and I frankly hadn't even asked him since. No one, no matter how clairvoyant or how wise, could ever say with finality that would satisfy everybody in this world precisely what happened. And I think we ought to quit trying to attempt to do so, because I think it's an impossible task. And I don't care what kind of a body you constituted. I think you'd have a problem of them taking uncertain things, of them making interpretations and evaluations of their own and forming a conclusion which might or might not agree with the Warren Commission, and then where would you be? You just have somebody else's opinion. Precise 1/18th of a second in which I was hit. Now, by the same token, I don't think the Commission can do so, nor do I think anyone else can do so.
Yeah, and he's countering the points of recreating those shots as well too with that little ending bit that he said.
Yeah, but his saying that we'll never know is probably very. He's specifically talking about the sequence of the shots or his reaction time or things like that. But actually, I think he was talking about the overall case. And if that is the case, according to the Warren Commission, they already solved it. They already explained it. So the fact that he says we'll never know, I think it was an unintended gaffe on his part. But the previous clip that you played that I called very disturbing, again, I think that was he was absolutely being a mouthpiece for those institutions. And I doubt very highly that he ever actually read Mark Lane's book from cover to cover. Because
Berkeley didn't even read Manchester's, and he was quoted in that one.
Right. So you cannot impugn then private researchers. And he wasn't like Harold Weisberg, who you could at least on the surface laugh and say, because he's a chicken farmer from Maryland. This is an attorney. This is an attorney who appeared before the Warren Commission in order to preserve the rights of Lee Harvey Oswald, who was dead by that time, and needed to have an advocate before the Warren Commission's body, and he wanted to be that advocate. He was asking to represent Oswald's interest during the proceedings of the Warren Commission, and of course he was denied that. But so this is an attorney, a very smart man, who probably isn't very easily persuaded by things, and who provided evidence, as Connally was talking about, that he didn't discover any evidence that the Warren Commission never did, and I'm speaking specifically about the oral histories of the witnesses. Some of those witnesses that he filmed and that he interviewed and talked about in his book rushed to judgment, were never called by the Warren Commission or interviewed by the FBI. So this just blanket dismissal of any criticism of the Warren Commission, it smacks to me of being a mouthpiece for, and he might not have even have created that statement. He may have been handed it to him by somebody and said, "Read this."
I'm going to play this. I'm going to do rapid fire. We got to wrap up because it's hitting that 2-hour mark, and Spotify only limits things to 2 hours when it comes to video.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I just want to make sure that people can see the video when we're doing this too. But this is going to be a couple clips from Cyril Wecht.
Tell me, have you been privy of any other information outside of the information that this panel has been reviewing for some time?
No, sir, other than what Mr. Stokes had asked me about before, that examination of the primary copy of the Zapruder film at Life magazine in 1966, nothing else. I also hope that I have kept more of an open mind and have also recognized that it is not my responsibility. I do not mean that I am disinterested or unmindful of the significance, but it is not my responsibility to retroactively justify and defend the investigation that was done, which I think was extremely superficial and sloppy, inept, incomplete, incompetent in many respects, not only on the part of the pathologist who did this horribly inadequate medical legal autopsy, but on the part of many other people. It's the kind of examination that would not be tolerated in a routine murder case by a good crew of homicide detectives in most major cities of America on anybody, just a plain ordinary citizen, let alone a president.
This is the panel didn't test the possibility of CE 399.
The panel, I am most unhappy, have been extremely dismayed by their failure to insist upon the performance of appropriate experiments, which I believe could have been undertaken with a reasonable degree of expenditure of time, energy, and money to once and for all show whether a bullet, 6.5 millimeter copper jacketed lead core piece of military type ammunition could indeed strike a rib and a radius in a human being and emerge in the condition which Commission Exhibit 399 is today. I am extremely unhappy about the fact that a more intensive effort was not made to locate the missing pieces of very important medical evidence in this case, which I pointed out back in the summer of 1972. Not that I was the first to learn of this, but amazingly, nobody had made that public disclosure prior to that time.
That's not true. The Clark panel that was impaneled in 1968 to prevent the district of the district attorney of New Orleans Parish, Jim Garrison, from requesting the autopsy materials for his trial or his legal proceedings against Clay Shaw. The Clark panel was the one that discovered that the missing autopsy materials, and it was so publicly disclosed. However, again, Cyril Wecht is completely correct. He and I completely disagreed about certain aspects of the single bullet theory, and I think unwittingly he just confirmed what I believe. The single bullet theory, or the impossibility of it, is not based on the position of the men, because you have had documentaries since then with the advent of technology, with 3D renderings and GPS and things like that, that people have gone to great lengths to show through the films, through the photos, that Kennedy and Connally were in fact lined up enough for both bodies to have accepted a single bullet fired from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. For me, that is not the argument. The argument is not, could these two men have been hit by one bullet? They could have. Dr. Wecht just testified it is military grade equipment. It was specifically made, the bullets were specifically made to be able to go through two people and to do damage. That was the whole point of the bullet. What makes the single bullet theory impossible is the condition of Commission Exhibit 399. That bullets cannot go through two people and come out unscathed. That's the key. And even the FBI's own tests, which were in the Warren Commission, the testimony and exhibits, the 26 volumes, but the Warren Commission knew that very few people were going to look through all 26 volumes, but you can find it. They had their own tests, the ballistics test, where they wanted to duplicate or represent the non-fatal wounds of both men. So they fired a bullet, the 6.5 lead core, copper jacketed bullet, through a cotton wadding, striking nothing. And if you compare that with Commission Exhibit 399, they look very similar. Then they shot through a wrist of a cadaver to simulate Governor Connally's wrist wound. Then they shot through a rib of a goat. No, it was a human cadaver through a wrist, and then a goat, the rib of a goat. So they wanted to duplicate the wounds. With each succeeding test, that is the rib of a goat and the wrist of a cadaver, the bullet mushrooms and expands and widens, and that's individual bullets, not one bullet hitting cotton wadding, then a human rib of a goat, and then a human wrist. It was each one in succession, and you could tell that the bullet certainly could not hold up to the density of a bone and come out unscathed. So the impossibility of the single bullet theory lies in the condition of Commission Exhibit 399, not whether or not the men could line up so they could be hit by one bullet.
Being witness against the single bullet theory, he presented an exhibit of several bullets that had been fired at different objects that illustrated it rather forcefully. First, he showed the bullet that was found on the stretcher, so according to the single bullet theory, having gone through the back of the president, emerged through his throat, then struck Governor Connally in the chest, then the wrist, and then the thigh. It is flattened slightly. He showed this with pictures, flattened slightly, but there's not much deformity at all. He then showed a photograph of two bullets that had been fired through simple cotton, nothing hard that they were struck at all. And there's more deformity in the bullets fired through pure cotton than there was in the bullet that struck supposedly two men.
I wanted to play that because that was Jeremiah Leary. He's a plant for the FBI, by the way. He's the one that leaked Hoover's testimony to the Warren Commission when Hoover didn't want to give testimony. And when Ramsey Clark asked how Jeremiah Leary got it, he said, "I think Hoover leaked it to him." Jeremiah Leary was the one that kind of worked with the FBI, specifically Hoover.
It could be. And Cyril Wecht makes the point, though, of those test bullets that he was talking about and that I talked about before you played that clip. The test bullets that the Warren Commission published, those were the best bullets. That is, those were the ones with the least damage because they did several tests. And so they chose those as exemplary. So those were the best ones they had. So you can imagine how messed up the other bullets that they test fired through wrists of a cadaver and ribs of a goat must have been.
I have the short for that. Hold on, I have the short for that. I know for a fact I have Connally's.
Yeah. So that right there, their own tests done at that time prove that the single bullet theory.
Panel, I am most unhappy, have been extremely dismayed by their failure to insist upon the performance of appropriate experiments, which I believe could have been undertaken with a reasonable degree of expenditure of time, energy, and money to once and for all show whether a bullet, 6.5 millimeter copper jacketed lead core piece of military type ammunition could indeed strike a rib and a radius in a human being and emerge in the condition which Commission Exhibit 399 is today. I am extremely unhappy about the fact that a more intensive effort was not made to locate the missing pieces of very important medical evidence in this case.
And I don't mean to be insensitive, and Dr. Wecht, when he proposed this, didn't mean to be insensitive, but essentially what he is suggesting, or what he's saying he's disappointed on, is something he clarified in 1986 during the trial of Lee Harvey Oswald Showtime special. You get human cadavers. That is what people donate their bodies to science for. It's not just medical. It's not just surgical. It's for lots of different reasons that you have cadavers at your disposal. And it seems very insensitive that you would take these cadavers and you would shoot bullets through them. But that's something that's been done before in certainly the military to see effects on different calibers of bullets and different explosives and so forth and so on. So bodies have been blown apart for those very, very reasons. So it wasn't, as insensitive as it may sound, it was not unheard of to set up human cadavers inside a limousine of similar dimensions. You take that rifle, you take those bullets, and you shoot. And you shoot, and you shoot, and you shoot. And you can even position yourself in such a way that you can make sure that a bullet will go through both cadavers, maybe not necessarily with precision through the rib and through the wrist. I think that's asking a lot. But just see the effect of this kind of ammunition through two bodies, because besides the bones that it struck in Connally, you're also talking about 7 layers of cloth, 9 layers of flesh, and every time a bullet strikes something, there's an effect on the bullet. Materially affects the bullet. Even if it's skin, even if it's cloth. The more things it goes through, obviously, the more signs of deformity you expect to see. So that's what Wecht was referring to.
Hold on. Yeah, stupid video. This is Charles Petty of the medical panel that disagreed with Wecht.
Say you are one of the 9 forensic pathologists serving on the select committee's autopsy panel. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, I am.
I believe you are a member of the subcommittee, the members of which have never reviewed the evidence in this matter before. Is that correct?
You are correct, sir.
As I understand it, there were 2 sub-panels. One sub-panel consisting of Dr. West, Dr. Weston, Dr. Spitz, and Dr. Wecht had reviewed the evidence prior to this occasion. Your sub-panel members had not reviewed it in the past.
That is correct. I had no opportunity or interest in reviewing the things, the entire information before I was asked to serve on the panel.
Had you ever expressed any opinion about the injuries or the result of the autopsy? Had you ever spoken about it or written about it before you examined the evidence?
No, sir. I have neither spoken about it, lectured about it, written about it, or in any way uttered any opinions concerning this assassination.
You had not formed any opinion about the result of the autopsy?
That is correct.
Were you in the hearing room yesterday and heard all of the testimony of Dr. Bodden and Dr. Wecht?
I was here for some 9 hours yesterday and listened avidly to everything that was said.
I would like to ask you, do you believe on the available evidence that the single bullet theory is valid and that Governor Connally and President Kennedy were hit by the same bullet?
Yes, sir. I believe that they were struck by the same bullet, and I have so previously stated in the preliminary report of...
Had you...
So I wanted to play that because he was one person that disagreed with Wecht on the panel but didn't care about the case before, like Wecht cared about the case before, and also didn't want to do the extra test. I want to play a couple more clips before you jump in with some things, please.
That you could reliably say that what happened to one cadaver or one wrist happened to Governor Connally. That's your view?
My view is, sir, that again, numerous subjects, animals, cadavers should be employed. And all of the retrieved ammunition studied very carefully. I repeat that I am not holding out personally for a percentage. Show me that it happens more than 50% of the time, because I don't think that would be reasonable unless one conducted, maybe 500 or 1,000 such, and then at that point, I think you'd have to say if it doesn't happen. But I want to see one bullet, just one, from as many animal carcasses and human cadavers as can be obtained. Just one bullet, breaking 2 bones. That's really the key.
And then this one about nothing interfering with CE 399.
Testified on behalf of the forensic pathology panel that the wound in Governor Connally's back was such to leave the majority of the panel to conclude that the bullet which struck him had struck something else first. Do you agree with that interpretation?
No, I do not feel that there is any definitive evidence, although it is a possibility that the bullet might have struck a small branch, some leaves coming in. I cannot rule that out, but I think that the fact that the scar on Governor John Connally's back is in a horizontal plane is more consistent with the shot having been fired from the right side, the right rear, entering with some degree of a tangential nature, some tangential.
Again, he's saying possibility, which is important because a lot of people will say, no, that's impossible. He's leaving it open, saying, I don't know the full thing. The thing I'm trying to tell you is that this bullet could not have come out perfect as it did. That's all he was saying. They kept asking him, do you think it could have been a possible, bounced off this and this? He goes, doesn't matter what it did. I'm telling you, it's impossible for it to do all that and then still come out like how it did.
My colleagues on the panel, they are aware of this. We discussed it. And what we keep coming back to is, well, we don't know how the 2 men were seated in relationship to each other. I don't care what happened behind the Stemmons Freeway sign. There is no way in the world that they can put that together. And likewise, on the horizontal plane, the bullet, please keep in mind, entered in the president's right back, I agree, exited in the anterior midline of the president's neck, I agree, and was moving thence by definition, by known facts, by a straight line from entrance to exit, from right to left. And so with that bullet moving in a leftward fashion, it now somehow makes an acute angular turn, comes back almost 2 feet, stops, makes a second turn, and slams into Governor John Connally behind the right armpit, as it is referred to medically, the right posterior axillary area. The vertical and horizontal trajectories of this bullet, 399, under the single bullet theory, are absolutely unfathomable, indefensible, incredible.
I'm going to play this one about the commentary on Weck's testimony, and I got one more, then we can get back to
it. He believes at least 3 shots hit the people and that probably 4 or 5 shots were fired. We're here with Jeremiah O'Leary from the Washington Star, David Lifton, a private critic of the Warren Commission. Jerry, did Dr. Weck's testimony hold up at the end of the afternoon?
Dr. Weck's statements pretty thoroughly seemed to demolish the 1 bullet theory, but then he injected an additional bullet so that we're now left with, he leaves us with 4 bullets fired, 3 of which he believes struck the president and Governor Connally. And Chairman Stokes asked him one question. He said, what is the average American to believe?
The 8 people or the 1 person?
No, the average American.
Right.
What is the average American to believe? And Dr. Weck answered the chairman's question by saying, it's in your hands.
And I want to play this one because we talked about it with the Ramsey Clark one. It's January 26, 67.
I think we have the 3 pathologists and the photographer signed up now on the autopsy review. And their conclusion is that the autopsy photos and x-rays conclusively support the autopsy report rendered by them to the Warren Commission. We were not able to tie down the question of the missing photo entirely, but we feel much better about it. And we've got 3 of the 4 signed to an affidavit that says these are all of the photos that they took, and they don't believe anybody else took any others.
Now, you mentioned something about the missing evidence, and that was actually said before. I don't know if it was Ramsey Clark or if it was Abe Fortas that said it, because exactly what you said that it had been said before. Yeah, the missing friend. It was Abe Fortas that said it. 10/3/66.
I was never talked about. The clothes were put in the FBI vault just because Mrs. Kennedy's feelings.
I would doubt that. I'll bet $10 they're in the archives of the Kennedys. I saw a story last night somewhere where Bobby had, no, it's this morning in the U.S. News. It's out today. That he had seized all the pictures, missing X-ray pictures that provide the major remaining mystery about the facts of the assassination of President Kennedy are reported. Some officials concerned have been taken over soon after the assassination by Robert Kennedy, then turned to place in the Kennedy archive. They reportedly were never offered the Warren Commission investigating the assassination, because this would have involved publication in the report of the gory death pictures.
Oh, good Lord. Well, the chief thinks there. I'll find out about that.
And that's not true. That's not true. The Warren Commission, they did have access to the autopsy photographs and X-rays. They chose not to see them because they didn't want to look at them.
Well, Earl Warren said that he publicly said he withheld the other members from seeing them.
Right, because he saw one, and he said, no. That's why they went to the drawings instead of
Hale Boggs was having a problem with that, and so did John J. McCloy.
Yeah, but that's just not true. That they were not. They were not offered to the Warren Commission. And they didn't have to publish it. They didn't publish a lot of things that they looked at, but that's not the point. That's not here or there. That's a lot of clips, a lot to unpack. So I'll try to do this as quickly as possible. From the get-go, Dr. Charles Petty, you saw a clip of him, one of the 8 pathologists convened by the House Select Committee on Assassinations that disagreed with Dr. Wecht. Both Petty and Wecht not only were involved in the JFK case, but involved in the Hampton case, the Fred Hampton assassination. Dr. Petty did Fred Hampton's 3rd autopsy. So after he was buried in Louisiana, 3 months later, the federal grand jury of 1970 asked that Hampton's body be exhumed and an autopsy being done. Dr. Charles Petty was the one who did the 3rd autopsy. Dr. Wecht, in one of his books, claimed a knowledge of the Hampton autopsy, which I discovered was not true. So Dr. Wecht and I again went to our odds at this, and calls into a question, is certainly with Wecht, the consulting that he's done in cases throughout the years and how much he really has an authority on those cases. As far as Fred Hampton is concerned, he is no authority on it. So if anybody picks up his book, now I can't remember which one it is, very dubious to take anything that Wecht says about the Fred Hampton case with a grain of salt. You've got to take it with a grain of salt. And again, I need to emphasize that the incompetent way that JFK's autopsy was handled renders the findings of that autopsy irrelevant. We are talking about medical legal autopsies. That is, autopsies that can be defended legally in a court of law. Had Lee Harvey Oswald gone to trial, if he had lived, gone to trial, if he had had a competent lawyer, the very first thing that his lawyer would have done is he would have said, you can't prove that President Kennedy is even dead because the autopsy doesn't even establish that. No identification fingerprints. Nobody ID'd the body as is usually done with autopsies, and that the autopsy was performed by people who were incompetent, who were not medically trained or board certified in forensic pathology. So anything that they found is completely irrelevant. That has to be remembered. So for Petty, for Dr. Charles Petty, to simply blithely dismiss Cyril Wecht's criticisms of the findings of the autopsy really, for me, calls into question, then what kind of professional are you? Okay? But even Wecht, being very authoritative in his agreement with the House Select Committee on Assassinations and their findings, and the forensic pathology panel finding that a bullet did in fact go through Kennedy's throat. As I pointed out earlier in this podcast, it was never forensically established that a bullet had gone through his neck. The only thing that had been established through this incompetent autopsy is that there was one bullet hole in the back of President Kennedy's back. That's all that was established the night of the autopsy. Dr. James Humes, who was in charge of the autopsy, one of the three pathologists who did the autopsy, the night of the autopsy, he only established there was a bullet wound in his back. The wound to Kennedy's throat was assumed to be a tracheotomy. And again, because he did not talk to the doctors in Dallas prior to the autopsy, he was left to conclude that this was a tracheotomy wound, not a wound that had been extended by the tracheotomy. And therefore, they did not dissect the neck. They did not track a bullet because they didn't establish that a bullet track had been caused. Once the autopsy was finished, once the embalmers got to Kennedy's body and he's ready for burial, and actually they were going to have an open casket. That's how well they prepared his body. Then Hume sits in his office and says, maybe I should give Dr. Perry in Dallas a call. Dr. Perry then recounts for Humes that when he saw Kennedy for the first time, there was a bullet wound in his throat, very small. And hence all of the reporters who said that he said that it was a wound of entrance in the front of his throat. Now Humes has to write a report to account for a wound that he never saw, that he never examined on the night of the autopsy. So what does he do? He takes his autopsy notes and he puts them in the fire, and he rewrites his report to then finally connect the bullet wound in the back to a bullet wound in the throat that he never saw and never examined and never established legally existed. So even Wecht, who I for most of my association with him, respect him very much, doesn't have the authority to say that a bullet did in fact pass through the body. There are many researchers out there who believe that the bullet in the back stopped, and that's the bullet that was on the stretcher, and that Kennedy was shot in the throat by some other means, whether in the front or whether it was a dart or to paralyze him. As fanciful as those theories seem, it's because of the incompetence of the autopsy that they even exist. Those kind of conspiracy theories exist. So if you do not have a bullet going through Kennedy's throat, then you cannot have the single bullet theory. So it stops right there. I always joke that the single bullet theory was stopped when Dr. Humes tried to probe the back wound with a metal probe and then his finger, and he claimed, per the FBI report of the two agents who were in the autopsy room and basically transcribing what Dr. Humes is saying out loud, he said he could feel the end of the bullet wound, that it did not go through. So the night of the autopsy, the single bullet theory was completely destroyed. So I'm just trying to make the point that because of the incompetency from start to finish of that autopsy, no authority can be given to the findings of that autopsy. And for that reason alone, Kennedy should have been exhumed at any point during the last 6 decades. And in fact, he still should be, because I think that those missing autopsy materials are in fact buried with him, and that Robert Kennedy did that because his grave was moved in 1967. And I think that Robert Kennedy put those materials in his tomb with him so that they could be there when he became president and could then reinvestigate his brother's assassination. So again, I cannot stress strongly enough that because of the incompetence of the autopsy, everything else is called into question. So any pathologist worth their weight, any forensic pathologist worth their weight who knows what a medical legal autopsy is, cannot state definitively, either through the report itself or through the pictures that supposedly purport to substantiate the report, are in any way definitive whatsoever. As far as I'm concerned, we still have not proven that Kennedy is in fact dead, simply because I take the letter of the law that literally when it comes to autopsies. And the fact that Lee Harvey Oswald, his accused assassin, he had 2 medical legal autopsies. He was exhumed in 1981, simply because people said that his mastoid scar wasn't in the initial autopsy, so they wanted to make sure that the Lee Harvey Oswald born in New Orleans in 1938 was the same Lee Harvey Oswald that was buried in Dallas. So he had 2 autopsies that were medically legal, done by competence, and the results of which that were immediately released to the public as opposed to suppressed, like JFK's autopsy. So
I played a lot of clips, gave me a lot of answers.
Absolutely.
We went through a lot. I wanted to have you back on because I wanted to discuss some of these things and just get your opinion on some of the stuff. And it's been a while. I always appreciate having you on and everything like that.
It's always a pleasure.
I do respect, like I said, your opinion, your thought process, critical thinking when it does come to the case. I'm trying to stick to a lot of fact-based stuff. I'm just trying to speak with researchers of where they heard certain things and trying to kind of keep a more source record than what is out there for anyone new to the case, because I think a lot of people can be interested. They just kind of have to see the evidence for themselves, and going off books, someone saying, go read this, is not helpful. Especially in a generation where everything's like in video format. So put it all in video format, and hopefully we get into a point where it becomes more of a solution to people. But again, Craig, thank you again for the time. We've talked a little bit past what usually we do. Is there a place where people can find your links? I'm assuming the website's probably still a work in progress.
My Fred Hampton one is, yes. But if you're interested in the work that I did on the eyewitnesses, then that still is available at Craig Ciccone at WordPress. Yeah, CraigCiccone.wordpress.com. I don't know if you can put a link in there.
I can. I will. I'll put it in the description below for people to be able to click.
And yeah, and as far as the RFK book and schematic of the Ambassador Hotel, that is still in the works. I am in fact doing that with Tim Smith. And he's been unfortunately dealing with some medical issues, so we have not been able to get it done as quickly as I had hoped. But hopefully within the next year, the RFK eyewitness database will be available.
And I'll try and book something else to have you guys back on to discuss a little bit more in depth of some things. Thank you again, Craig. Seriously.
Thank you, Robbie.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of Out of the Blanket, and stay tuned for our next episode.